You know, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, it's so much more than just a superhero movie, right? It's one of those cultural touchstones, a modern myth that completely changed the game for the whole genre. But its real power, the thing that makes it stick with you, doesn't just come from the incredible spectacle. It comes from an idea so powerful it actually mirrors a startling scientific theory about how society itself works. So let's break it down. Let's see how the Joker's chaos is a perfect and, frankly, terrifying metaphor for a real-world scientific principle.
Wow, that line. It's just one of the all-time greats. And it's not just a clever piece of dialogue. The writer, Jonathan Nolan, actually considered this the most important line in the entire script. It's basically the film's thesis statement. It perfectly sets the stage for this brutal look at morality, at order, and at what happens when an unstoppable force finally meets an immovable object.
And its impact. You really can't overstate it. The movie wasn't just a hit, it was an absolute cultural juggernaut. Of course it dominated the box office, but the bigger deal was the level of critical respect it got. That was just unheard of for a comic book movie at the time. Heath Ledger's posthumous Oscar? That was a watershed moment, the first time a major acting award went to a film in this genre. And then, its selection for the National Film Registry. That cemented it. It's not just a great movie, it's a culturally significant piece of American art.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? Beyond the incredible action, the unforgettable performances, what is the core idea that makes The Dark Knight so timeless? Well, the answer lies in its villain, and the very specific kind of chaos that he brings to the table.
All right, so let's start with the agent of chaos himself, the Joker. In this film is just unlike any villain that came before him, and honestly, he is the key to understanding everything else that happens.
See, the writers, Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, they didn't want to just tell a simple story of a hero fighting a bad guy. They were aiming for something bigger. They crafted a philosophical war. On one side, you have Batman, who represents this fragile, self-imposed order in a really corrupt system. And on the other, you have the Joker. He's this outside variable introduced for one reason and one reason only, to prove that the system, that order, will always fail.
And that's not just an interpretation, that's straight from the director. Nolan saw the Joker not as a criminal, but as this pure elemental force of anarchy. He isn't trying to build an empire, he's not trying to get rich, he just wants to prove that deep down, when the chips are down, everyone is just as ugly as he is. He wants to watch the world burn.
And this was a very deliberate choice by the Nolans. Think about it. Unlike most villains who are a product of their environment, the Joker gets no backstory. No chemical vet, no tragic childhood. He just is. The writers believed that if they gave him some cliché origin story, it would actually make him less frightening. By making him unknowable, they transformed him from a person into a pure function, a terrifying random variable designed to test the absolute limits of a society. So what happens when you unleash a function like that on a city? Well, it doesn't just break buildings, it breaks people. And the Joker has a very, very specific target in his sights.
So let's talk about Harvey Dent, Gotham's White Knight. He's the city's legitimate hero. He's the guy who's supposed to be incorruptible, the man who fights crime by the book. He represents the hope that Gotham can actually be saved without a masked vigilante, that the system can actually work. The Joker's whole plan, his grand experiment, is to prove that any part of a system, even its strongest link, can be corrupted. His plan isn't really about killing people, it's about targeting the city's symbolic pillar of hope. He introduces this extreme, unbearable pressure by taking away everything Harvey Dent loves, starting with Rachel Dawes, just to see at what point that pillar finally breaks.
And the experiment is a horrifying success. The tragic transformation of Harvey Dent into the vengeful Two-Face, that isn't just a character arc, it's the Joker's proof of concept. It demonstrates that chaos can absolutely shatter the strongest ideals. It makes the city's greatest hero into the very thing he fought against, and in doing so, it perfectly fulfills that opening prophecy.
Now, the Joker's chaos doesn't just corrupt Gotham's official hero, it forces its other hero into a moral corner, making him question the very rules that define who he is. So, here's the crucial question. How do you defeat an enemy who has no rules? Batman's entire code is built on one very important rule. He will not kill. But when he's up against a man who thrives on pure chaos, he discovers that his own strict code becomes a liability, and it forces him into making these impossible, system-breaking choices.
And the film poses this question directly to all of us through one of its most controversial plot points:
When the Joker basically vanishes into the city, Batman is faced with this terrifying choice between security and liberty.
So what does he do? He builds this massive surveillance machine hijacking every single phone in Gotham. His own ally, Lucius Fox, calls it an unacceptable breach of ethics and even threatens to quit over it. But Batman sees it as a temporary, necessary evil to stop a mass murderer. The fact that he makes sure it's destroyed afterwards shows that he understands the terrifying power he's just unleashed, but he still chose to unleash it.
And his final sacrifice is the most profound of all. To save the soul of the city, to make sure that the Joker doesn't get the last laugh, Batman takes the fall for all of Two-Face's crimes. He allows himself to become the villain so that the city's legitimate hero can die a hero. He becomes the Dark Knight.
Okay, so it's an incredible story, right? It's all about moral compromise and the true nature of chaos. But what if I told you that this exact dynamic, this entire narrative, is a perfect metaphor for a real concept in evolutionary game theory? Yeah, you heard that right. In 2011, a group of scientists published a paper actually titled The Joker Effect: Cooperation Driven by Destructive Agents. They literally used the film as a visual metaphor to explain their model of how societies evolve. And this is where things get really fascinating.
Their model starts with a classic scenario called the public goods game. Think of it like this. You have cooperators who contribute to society's well-being. Then you have defectors who exploit that common good without contributing anything themselves. Think of them as Gotham's organized crime syndicates. They're basically parasites on the system.
So normally, the system would just be overrun by defectors. That's the D corner on this graph, because they just exploit the cooperators. But then the scientists introduced the Joker, marked J. Now look at the graph. The Joker isn't a stable corner you can just rest in. They are a disruptive force. They don't gain anything themselves. They just inflict damage on everyone. And that creates this constant, unpredictable cycle that you see in those looping arrows. The system can never, ever settle down. And this brilliantly illustrates this new cyclical dynamic. It's like a game of rock, paper, scissors. First, the defectors, the mob. They exploit the cooperators, the good citizens of Gotham. Then the Joker arrives and he just wrecks the defectors, because the mob needs a functioning society to leech off of. But the Joker just wants to burn it all down. But finally, the cooperators, people like Batman and the citizens on those ferries, they ultimately outperform the Joker, because they can rebuild, and he gains nothing from all his destruction. The Joker's presence, paradoxically, allows cooperation a chance to reemerge, but it also ensures the system never finds peace.
And that's it. That is the science of The Dark Knight. The film is a perfect narrative of this exact theory. It's not just a story about a hero, it's a story of a system, Gotham City, and how its entire dynamic gets redefined by the introduction of a single, indiscriminate, destructive agent.
Which leaves us with this final, kinda unsettling thought. The Joker effect theory suggests that a purely destructive force can, paradoxically, create the conditions for cooperation to come back even stronger than before. It really begs the question, does a society need to be pushed to the absolute brink by chaos just to remember why order and cooperation are worth fighting for in the first place?